Great. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone, today. This is day number 3 today in our podcast focusing on COVID-19 and how schools are responding. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, our first one we focused on food and nutrition issues. We had Hunger Free Oklahoma and now Reno Public Schools on to talk about how schools can make sure kids get fed during the school shutdown. Our second one was focused on educational resources, specifically what can schools provide for guidance for families during this wonderful shutdown, when kids are, maybe driving parents nuts. Not that I'm speaking about from experience. And then this is number 3. We're going to focus on technology challenges. How can schools make sure that they've got the right resources in place? Probably this is going to focus more on post April 6th, because right now schools are kind of shut down. But I think that there's a chance we go back to normal on April 6th, but I wouldn't bet on it. And I think that schools need to start thinking about what are the steps that they can take, that if they need to serve students, post April 6th in a different fashion, how do they think about that? And then a little bit later today, we'll be finishing up our fourth one. We focus on mental health and wellness. So today, really excited and want to thank Eric Wells, is Chief Operating Officer of Muskogee Public Schools. And we have Josh Williams, who's Systems Engineer with Aruba Networks. So guys, thanks for joining us today and taking time out of your schedules to help out.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Glad to be here.
So, Eric, let's start with you. Josh and I are old buddies, and I reached out to him yesterday, or maybe, I don't know how we got connected, but I said, okay, who's doing this well within schools? Because to me, as schools are trying to figure this stuff out, we can read books or we can do whatever, but getting real life examples of how it's going is doing well. And Josh recommended you, which we're going to take as a good thing. But
it is.
Yeah. Tell us, what does Muskogee put in place, and how did you go about doing that? And if you can kind of keep on the eye on the focus of if I'm a school leader that doesn't have technology in place to promote distance learning, what are the steps that they could take?
Sure, that makes perfect sense. I think probably the most important thing and takeaway I'll work with today is that you can't do it alone, and we have not been able to do it alone ourselves. Whether it be from Ron dollars or even just some corporate social responsibility from companies like T-Mobile, even some local business partners, we would not have the stones we have in place today if it were not for our leadership team having a vision to culminate, is technology the best means for delivery in the absence of a school building? They decided yes, it was. And so some plans are put into place, and gathering those external partners to make things come into play made it happen for us, because it would not have happened if it weren't for some of those partners.
So who are some external partners you brought in?
Sure. Our major one is T-Mobile. We actually applied for a grant through the Empowered Ed program, which actually is eligible for every school in the nation to apply for that. And I'll say they're very liberal with their awards for that. And so like your free and reduced status doesn't necessarily matter for this program. So they would look forward to people who want to be movers and shakers in the technology world and move things forward for the better of kids. And so that's really their criteria for that program. And so, we, of course, years ago, we've had the checkout hotspots for the library model and things like that. But we were actually able to secure 2 years of every student having a mobile hotspot with data on it. And so that's kind of where our ball went in motion, was when that was awarded to us.
So every kid has a hotspot?
Correct. Yeah, K through 12. Every kid has a hotspot.
Wow, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Is that eligible today? I mean, could schools apply for that today?
It is. Yep, it is eligible today.
Okay. And you said it's the T-Mobile Empowered Award?
Empowered Ed. Yes, sir.
Empowered Ed.
Empowered Ed.
Okay. I'll Google that, and we'll put a link in our show notes about that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Tell me about more partners, or, who else did you guys reach out to?
Some of our local businesses, actually, some of our McDonald's owners that own some of those franchises have been big beneficiaries of some of our students who, just example, we're pretty poor with the socioeconomic status. So students who, sometimes may lose their Chromebook or break it and can't necessarily afford the insurance or to replace that part, they will step in and take care of that for them. And so it can get quite expensive to maintain a fleet of 6,000 devices on a school's budget. And so reaching out to people who will help students furnish or sponsor them, so to say, has been a big hit for us as well.
That's awesome. So you said you have 6,000 devices. How many students do you have?
Right now we're at 5,300. So we do have a sizable loaner pool. So as things are in and out of the shop, students very rarely are without a device at any given time.
And so then by the school providing the device, you can provide a lot of security and whatnot, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's actually embedded, and even into the T-Mobile devices. Those hotspots are also hardwired back to be filtered, regardless of what device is hooked to them, whether it be a parent's cell phone or student-owned or school-owned Chromebook. It will still go through the same filtering system.
That's smart. Do you do BYOD? Bring your own device?
We do not. The district has opted to not have as an option, just because we try our hardest to furnish every student a working device at all times.
So I want to come back to Muskogee, but I want to explore this idea because I'm worried about districts that don't have devices right now.
Exactly.
Obviously, the internet's a big bad place. And Josh, I don't know if you guys done any work like with school districts with BYOD and any types of controls, or I mean, how does that thought?
Yeah, so there are different ways of addressing the security and management aspect of this, right? And that's critical. Obviously, if you're using federal funds to fund any kind of program in terms of device access, internet access, that sort of thing, then there are federal laws that apply that govern and dictate that the internet connections must be content filtered, and there must be certain levels of security in place, that you have policy around that. And obviously, just for laws and regulations aside, you want to protect students for all the right reasons when they're using these networks. And so there are different levels of security. Obviously, good security on a network is a multi-layered approach, and that gets more complicated when we send devices outside the bounds of a school district and send them home with students and send them to other places. And when we have a situation like we're in today, where we have devices being used by default and at all times at homes and in different places like that, it becomes even more paramount that we're on top of those challenges. One of the things that I know T-Mobile does a good job of is working with the school district to make sure that all the traffic through the hotspot, wherever it's being used, is being filtered or managed one way or another from a safety perspective. And there are a couple of different ways of doing that. They can tunnel the traffic back virtually to the school district, to its content filtering appliances there, to its firewalls at the local school district. And then there are also agents that can be software agents that can be installed on personal devices or school-owned devices, so that no matter where they're connected, they're protected and filtered that way as well. And it's not just content filtering, right? It's about protecting students' identities from being compromised. It's about protecting devices and data from being compromised through malware and that sort of thing as well. And so having that multi-pronged, that multi-layered approach is critical. And that typically takes place. It's much easier to do inside of a school district, but on top of the firewall, having those partnerships with your service providers, and then having a good security software suite that you can install on devices is going to make all the difference.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we're thinking about hold on, I guess I forgot to do one thing at the start of this podcast. So we're recording this on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, the day after the state's announced all of the closures. Now this will be out there in the internets, and 3 days from now, everything we say may change, right? So, because if we haven't learned anything, we should have learned that the world can change rather quickly due to COVID-19. Right. So, we're going to try and give the very best guidance we can, but please make sure that if you're listening to this a couple weeks from now, we may sound like complete idiots, and it's not entirely our fault. So, so let's go back. If we're thinking from the school side, security is a huge issue. Let me ask one thing about the T-Mobile devices. So if I have a T-Mobile Chromebook or Chromebook from Muskogee that was purchased from T-Mobile with hotspot or donated, I guess it is, can I access the internet? Like, can I go to my regular Wi-Fi, or do I only use that hotspot?
On the school-owned Chromebooks, you can access your own Wi-Fi, but just as Josh was mentioning earlier, that Chromebook is tattooed, so it will tunnel back to us before it grants or denies any traffic to go back and forth. And the T-Mobile hotspots are the same way. So even mom's phone or whoever may be on that hotspot, it will also tunnel back for inspection before granting or denying.
Okay. So even if you're on your own Wi-Fi, kids can't get to, inappropriate sites or predatory sites, things like that.
That's correct.
That's great. Now, I know you don't have this, but if you had BYOD and you had, so kids can use their own device.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way, I guess they'd be logging into apps, right? And where they'd have an account that the school would be setting up. Talk how would you think about that if you tried to go about that approach?
From a Muskogee standpoint, it would really just, and this can vary from school to school, of course, but everyone's kind of starting to move to that learning ecosystem, that learning environment, whether it's a Google Classroom or a Canvas or some sort of LMS out there to where, their content is in a secure location and students and parents, even for that matter, can access and do the day-to-day activities. Of course, it does open up a whole other layer with BYOD, and I'm sure Josh can talk more about this, but the school loses some of that control on that device. We may have control in that sandbox where the school content is, but beyond that, the school actually has no say in what may happen on those devices. And so when you bring a device like that into a school environment, that does change things up. And so from the inside of our secure network, we have to do things a little differently to segment that traffic out somewhat. But in a home environment like we're talking about now, the student's virtual environment can be accessed on any desktop or internet connected device there is anywhere. So you're right, it's opened up different layers to that onion.
Yeah. You actually want to jump in?
Yeah, and I think, so, at some point we have to decide, what are the ultimate priorities here? And for a school district thinking about a situation like COVID-19 and having to send students home for potentially weeks on end, and figuring out how to maintain teaching and learning through this process, we would like to have 100% control over every bit of traffic that flows in and out of a student's device, but that may not be completely realistic. And so we have to decide what is more important, having the most amount of protection and control that we can have while still maintaining some level of connectivity, or, is it, we have to, achieve 100% compliance. And so what I would say here is that, student devices in a lot of cases, if we're talking about a BYOD model, in most cases, students are finding a way to connect outside the control of the school district anyway, whether that's hotspotting through their personal phone, whether that's an internet or Wi-Fi connection at home, or, at a McDonald's somewhere, or a hotel room, or anywhere else. We lose an element of control in terms of security and protection of students and devices at that point. But if they're BYOD devices, that's really happening anyway, no matter what. So it's probably, best here to kind of recalibrate at times and say, if we're doing everything we can to protect school-owned devices, school-owned internet connections, and giving students, teaching students how to behave safely and responsibly when they're using the network, is that, that may be enough in a time like this to say, let's go ahead and do what we can with teaching and learning.
Yeah. Sorry about that, guys. The wonders of working from home.
Always.
Home coming open. Hey, never coming open. No, I think you're right. And I think part of this also goes to, doesn't matter what kind of filters we have, kids can still be jerks, can still be bullies, right? So a lot of this is teaching digital citizenship and stressing personal responsibility with students, right? Because, and guess what? Like, at some point they're going to leave the schools and they're going to have to go out there and be, regular humans that interact with the rest of us. And spend 5 minutes on Twitter, and we know that we all need some work on that. So,
Absolutely.
One
No,
more
and I
thing
think,
I'll add too,
yeah,
just talk about students, and it's just one thing we've done at the school district, Muskogee Schools, is we've needed to just actually assess student readiness. Everyone just assumes and implies that all students are in a position in an environment where they can learn online, but you'd be surprised, even though kids are definitely digital natives, can they be successful in a fully online school environment? And we looked at it from aspect of students being bilingual or even vision and hearing impairments and whatnot. We had to make some accommodations along the way, especially for our bilingual population with this outage. That our students necessarily weren't ready, even though they had the hardware to perform. They didn't necessarily have the soft tools that they needed to also be successful during this outage. So that was a whole other layer we had to look at the school district as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
Josh.
yeah, and I think that illustrates something really critical here too, right? Is that there are two very different scenarios that apply. So even though we're talking about Muskogee long term, and for several years now having a successful one-to-one program with immense resources and planning behind all that, at some point we find ourselves in a situation like this where it's much more of a best effort scenario, right? And we're just trying to figure out what risk tolerance we have and what acceptance level we have of compromise to get the job done. And so there are lessons that we can take away from this that help us better prepare for expanding more planned and protracted one-to-one programs normally. And then there are lessons we can take away from that say, all right, next time, hopefully it doesn't happen again, but if this were to happen again in the future, what can we learn from this that makes us better prepared to handle this, next year or 5 years down the road or something like that. And we're finding out whether it's in businesses or whether we're in school districts or government organizations or whatever it is, we're finding out that some things are easier than we thought in terms of having meetings and working remotely, and other things we just don't think about ahead of time and you just don't see coming until it happens to you.
Yeah, one of these days, my conference room is actually going to work for these those types of meetings. So let's do a couple thought exercises, and I'm going to preface this with this: I have no idea what's going to happen post April 6th, right? But let's just say first one. So let's say so the state board meets next week, and they say, okay, starting April 6th. We're going to expect schools to have a distance learning plan, and that's going to take us through the end of the year. Complete hypothetical. I have no idea if that will happen. I really don't. If they did that, Eric, what would you do at Muskogee? Like, how would you go about making sure that teachers can teach, and what platform would they be using? What do you think would go well? What are the big concerns you would have if that's what you have to do?
Sure. I'll say I'm pretty sure Muskogee schools at that point would probably take a two-pronged approach. I think there'd be differentiation between grades 6 and up and then 6 and below.
Okay.
It just, with our experience, some of those kindergarten, first, second, third, they don't necessarily always have the skills needed to fully operate independently in that virtual environment. And so they don't always have the home support that other families may have. And so we actually, before calling the school, we did send home a large amount of packets and things like that for physical pencil paperwork. And so that would probably be our rollout.
So your younger kids, they'd be getting paper packets.
I think we go to packets at that point. We're pretty good about getting the smaller kids into their ABC, whatever the case may be, for a while. But that's not a well-rounded education, as we know. You can't do the same thing over and over again. Yeah. However, grades 6 and up, they're a lot more, I guess I'll say, seasoned in terms of digital citizenship. And so, with their LMS, they can fully operate, whether it be through a Zoom or Google Hangout or whatever suite they would like to use. Those students are well versed enough. I believe we could continue. And luckily, we have the resources with our students and staff both to be able to move forward virtually. And I would feel much more comfortable with the secondary schools moving forward in the digital environment. However, like I said, in the primary grades, I personally feel that could be a struggle for anyone to have quality education virtually, just in the current environment we have.
Yeah, it'd be tough. Do you currently have a learning management system that's district-wide?
We're Google entirely, so we don't subscribe to a third party like Canvas or anyone like that, but we do use Google Classroom exclusively.
Okay. And do parents, so Google Classroom would be your LMS.
Mhm.
Would you look at the earlier levels? I honestly have never even thought this through. Like, if the kids complete the packets, would they be turning that in, like, or via the LMS, or do you think they'd still just it'd be packet pick up and drop off kind of stuff?
That's a good question. I feel probably the easy thing. I hate that it's going back, but pack up and drop off would be easiest. However, I know that there are some parents that could follow either a guide the school pushes out or a video or a tutorial how to. We probably could do some virtual work with some, but I think it goes back to that individual district decision and also take consideration, this is student readiness. Do they have that parental support that they can make those things happen? Because not all of them will, unfortunately, at least in our district. We know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. There'd be a lot of challenges trying to figure that out. So, oh gosh, I don't want to take this. So they'd have the LMS. I mean, I guess the high school kids would just be turning in their work. That's just sort of, you'd probably do a lot of that already, even if you're inside school, right? So you've got a lot of that by being a Google school. You've already moved there. You've already mentioned Canvas. Earlier today, when we were talking about different educational resources, Seesaw came up as another potential LMS for schools. And I know there's gobs of providers out there that are trying to make resources available to schools. Right. So let's do a different exercise now. So Muskogee's got a pretty good plan in place. Like, your younger kids, you're going to have some challenges, and everyone's going to have some challenges because this is a major change for teachers and for kids, and for parents. Imagine you're thrust in as the tech director at a small school, at a rural school, or just a school that doesn't have a lot of endpoint technology. So now the state board says, all right, Eric, you've got to, this school has to do distance learning. What are you going to do? You got 2 weeks to figure it out. So plenty of time, right? I mean, I don't know that this is a real scenario, but it seems like it dang well could be. Walk us through your thought process of what are you going to try and figure out first?
I think probably one of the first things I do is just try to look at my student base and realize, okay, they may not have a school-sponsored device, but is there any sort of laptop, tablet, home, whatever the case is, at home that they could use? And then I start to look for that easy agnostic platform like a Google Classroom, where if a school doesn't have a Google domain, they could pretty quickly stand one up and do some easy free tools that cost the district nothing, just a little bit of time to try to get things in place. And there could be an online presence fairly quickly. In terms of a school who doesn't have much, if anything, in terms of that infrastructure set up. But again, I think you do have to look at just your client base and look, is there even a phone in the house that could be used for this?
Yep.
It's going to be tough, but it can be done for largely free as far as the school's back end things go into play. But Josh, do you have anything you think you may add to that?
Yeah, I think, sometimes we just have to take the crawl, walk, run approach too, and not try to do too much too fast, and set ourselves up for failure. A situation like this, I'm glad you brought up the elementary students earlier, because it really is a very different scenario in terms of what we're trying to do from a teaching and learning perspective, but also how we need to interact with those students, just to maintain a sense of normalcy and that sort of thing. And a number of years ago, I was involved in starting up one of the first online schools public school programs in Oklahoma, with Connections Academy, before it was even Pearson Learning at the time, and learned a lot going through that process. And one of those was one of the number one one of the most important aspects of doing that at elementary school level was that one-to-one contact between the teacher and the student, the parent, on a consistent basis. And even if that's just a phone call, on a periodic basis, ideally a daily basis, but maybe semi-daily and that sort of thing. Just maintaining that touch point and checking on things and seeing how things are going. It may be all you can do in some of those situations. If you're given 2 weeks in a school district where nothing like this has ever been done before or set up before, and there's not resources to send home to parents, teachers may look more like guidance counselors at some of those grade levels than anything else, and it can grow from there, it can evolve from there. But doing the fundamental things right from the very beginning and growing from there is probably the most important thing, I think.
Yeah, I think you guys have hit the nail on the head. The guidance and I've just been talking to individual schools. Everyone's trying to figure out what the heck all this means right now. And two things I've told schools to consider doing rather soon is to do a survey and find out who has technology at home in terms of endpoint. So like if it's a phone, if it's an iPad, if it's another type of tablet, if it's a Chromebook, whatever. And specifically, does a student have access so that they can use that? If you got multiple kids at home, do you have multiple devices? So understand what your device situation is if you did have to go to just students using their own devices, and then what's your gap? Because there's going to be some kids without. I think it's going to be less than what we assume. I think at least for phones, I think most folks do have a phone in the house, so there'll be some type of technology. Is that ideal? No. So getting an understanding of that, and then my bigger concern right now is understanding who has connectivity at home and who doesn't.
Right.
So we're going to be putting together a resource page for how can they get families. I know that Cox has a very reduced option. I think Spectrum does as well. So we're going to be putting that information on our website, opsrc.net. We've got a COVID-19 page. And so if we can help get families connected, I think that would go a long ways, because the other option is send them to McDonald's or the library, and that's just not an option right now, and I don't know when that's going to happen again.
I'm glad you brought that up too, Brent, because one of the things we really ought to consider in the connectivity or the broadband gap is that right now, there are parts of the country that are already in shelter-in-place scenarios, right? So whether we even should be going out to other places is becoming less of an option for some people, and you shouldn't, right? There are very, very valid reasons to stay at home, but unfortunately, so many families rely on public schools as that 8 to 5 or 8 to 4 p.m. daycare aspect of their lives, while both parents or a single parent is at work all day. So there are additional challenges we have from a connectivity standpoint related to that. If the students are at grandpa and grandma's house instead of mom and dad's house because they can't be left home alone during the day, we have to be sure we're aware of that too. So it's, it becomes an even bigger challenge that, maybe is beyond, do they have connectivity at home with broadband, but through grandpa and grandma or whoever the daycare provider or childcare provider is, do they have connectivity there?
Yeah. They're actually doing the work. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's just, you can get swallowed right now with all of the details, right? I mean, I've one of our earlier podcasts, we brought up, what do we do about our first responders, our medical folks? School is a babysitter, right? I mean, they take care of our kids when we go do our job, and especially those folks that we need on the front lines. How are we helping them take care of their kids? Obviously, the world's changing fast, and we can't let all of those problems swallow us, but there's a lot out there. So we go back. I mean, I think, stressing to schools, if they can just get some information right now as we try and figure out where we go, knowing just what's the access from a hardware and from a connectivity standpoint would be important. And then I think definitely exploring platforms. We've already mentioned Google Classroom. It happens to be free. If you don't have Google set up at your school, the Resource Center can help with that. And I'm sure everybody on this call, Eric and Josh, would jump in. That's
right.
We're all here to help. And I don't care if you're a member of the Resource Center or not. If you're serving kids in Oklahoma, we'll help take care of you right now. So then we'll make you join later on. I think figuring out, it doesn't have to be Google. There's, Canvas. There's Seesaw we mentioned earlier. There's all kinds of different. But you got to have some type of a platform that, one, can track kids' work, and two, provides that way of communicating, because email kill you, and phone is fine, but I think you still want to have some way of recording that. And then, yeah, I think trying to figure out the larger issues of, as we move forward, I think most schools really need to start looking at places like Muskogee as a leader on this, of having, you know, devices available for every kid with connectivity, because that addresses so many problems, and it just lets kids be, more connected throughout the day. It's kind of the world we're moving toward. We talked in our earlier podcast about when I had Wes and Jamila on, talking about different, then there's all kinds of content providers that then through your platform you can tunnel to, right? I mean, it's almost endless list now, but just being able to track all of that. What am I missing, guys? What are the things that schools should be worried about from a technology standpoint?
And I think probably one of the biggest pieces, and this is for any district, whether very small to very large, is the technical support aspect of being able to support your students and families without being in the office. We're still working through that process now at Muskogee schools. We've actually set up a different hunt group, and so we're forwarding a round-robin approach whenever students call the help desk line that we have publicized internal and externally. It will dial home phones and cell phones, and so we're trying to support as much as we can while we're still working at home. We've had to put up parameters. How does someone find out about it, get in line for help, whether it be remote access or telephone support, and what are the hours we're doing district-wide support for student initiatives as we move forward, and setting expectations about what is the response time supposed to be, and because everyone would like things quickly now and in a hurry. And sometimes, especially as we're figuring things out, that's just is not always possible. We make every attempt to be, but sometimes not possible. And we've also gone as far as going ahead and having separate lines for students and then teacher support. So not that teachers get higher priority, but if the leader themselves can't run that classroom,
they need more support.
Obviously a lot more people. So teachers can access support differently than say an individual student can. Just because we know that we got to have that top down in this method to be able to serve more students. So technical support is the biggest piece of it. And I think as we roll closer towards April 6th, I think that'll become an even larger piece of the puzzle is how will districts support technology without being in the office.
Yeah, amen. On that teacher support side, that's one other thing tomorrow we're going to turn our attention to with, I think, with a podcast. I haven't quite nailed this one down, but how do we support? I mean, I just be frank, we're professional, but we do a lot of professional development, and I know doing it online and virtually is really difficult, and that same difficulty translates into teaching. So we're going to look at how can we support teachers as they look at these different options. How do we help train teachers? Because it's a heck of a lot different standing in front of a class working with kids than it is doing it in front of the computer. So
absolutely.
All right. Any final words? Anything else that before we end up here?
Now, I'll just say if anyone would like to reach out to us, we're glad to help, and so use do what we can for you. I promise.
Cool. Yeah, and you can get to opsrc.net. If you're just listening here, we'll have our COVID-19 there, and my email is Brent, brent.bushy, bushey at opsrc.net. We'll make sure to connect you with Josh or Chris or whomever else, however we can help. I'll just end with saying, number one, guys, thanks a lot for taking the time out. Number two, just stress that all of our worlds have been thrown into the blender, and let's give each other some grace, because we face some difficult days ahead. So I really appreciate you guys taking time.
Thank you for having us.
Anytime, and thank you very much.
Yeah, definitely. Take care.